Our scripture reading for today comes from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. Jesus told this parable to certain people who had convinced themselves that they were righteous and who looked on everyone else with disgust. Two people went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other was a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed about himself with these words, "God, I thank you that I'm not like everyone else, crooks, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of everything I receive." But the tax collector stood at a distance. He wouldn't even lift his eyes to look toward heaven. Rather, he struck his chest and said, "God, show mercy to me, a sinner." I tell you, this person went down to his home justified rather than the Pharisee. All who lift themselves up will be brought low, and those who make themselves low will be lifted up. May God bless the reading and the hearing and the understanding of the Scripture, and God's people said, Amen. Years ago, I had just finished rehearsing with the Fort Worth Community Band. I was 19 years old, and I already had everything figured out. And this older guy walked over to me, and he said, "Hey, do you ever play jazz?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, I play in this local group. We're called the Jazz Monsters, and we're kind of short a trombone player for this gig. It doesn't pay very much, but it's a really great group of people. Do you want to come play with us this weekend?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm in." I drove to this hole-in-the-wall place in downtown Fort Worth, and I found the band. I found out that doesn't pay much means that the band would take one intermission, and they would get paid in beer. But I was 19, and they wouldn't pay me in beer. So I was working for free that night. But I sat there next to a man. His name was Al Gehrig. You may not have ever heard of Al Gehrig, but the guy was a legend. At least in Al Gehrig's mind, he was a legend. He's played the same part as me, so I sat next to him, and I got to know him over a couple gigs. Al was this old-school New Jersey guy, and he laid it on thick. He always had an answer for something that you didn't know how to do. What are you doing? What are you doing? And I don't know a very good Jersey accent. It always comes back to be like Christopher Walken, so if you hear that, you're warned. So I found out through Al that he, back in the day, had played with some old school big jazz names like Stan Kenton. And at first, hearing about the people he had played with and the concerts he had played, I was kind of in awe of him. I was amazed at the life that this guy had lived. But then I found out he never shut up about it. He never stopped talking about how great he thought he was. He always had a story to tell you. He always had a story to one-up your story. Al was the kind of guy that you could tell he wasn't listening to your story because he was too busy picking out what story he was going to tell once you finally stopped talking, right? And it got to the point I would do this bad impression of Al where he had always done everything, and he always knew someone that was more important or had more achieved, or he was a piano tuner on the side, so he'd always brag that he had tuned the pianos of famous people. And it was just, at some point, it just became too much because Al Gehrig was a legend in the mind of Al Gehrig. And the thing is, you might not have known Al, but we've all known an Al, right? We've all known an Al Gehrig. Someone who feels like they're always trying to one-up, who's always name-dropping, always prove how good and accomplished and successful that they are. And the truth is, I'm guessing that a lot of us at different seasons and times of life, we might have been an Al Gehrig too. We've all started a new job or gone off to school or moved to a new community, and we really wanted to fit in. We've really wanted people to think that we are good and accomplished, and we are worthy of praise and worthy of being liked. But the question is, if we put all of our resources and time and thought into pretending to be something that we're not, who do we eventually become? Today we are kicking off a brand new sermon series. Over the next 7 or so weeks, we're going to dig into what gets called the 7 deadly sins. Now, the 7 deadly sins have kind of achieved a mythical status, right? Like to the point where we don't really even talk about them in church. Like I only hear about them when I'm watching like horror shows or horror movies, right? That's the only place they're there. But like I have questions though. Why has everyone heard of this? Why does it have such power to stick around in the minds of people or in culture? Also, why are there only 7? Feels like there's a lot more sins than that out in the world, right? We've heard the list: envy and greed and pride, sloth, lust, gluttony, and wrath. But I still have more questions. Are these really the worst ones? It feels like I can think of at least 7 other sins that are way worse than these. Excuse me. And who came up with these things? Who decided these are the 7 worst sins? There's a lot of history that brings us the list of what we call the 7 deadly sins. But the most important thing you need to know as we start out in this series is that the people who wrote these lists going way back to the 5th century, they themselves did not call them the 7 deadly sins. That changed over time. If we go back in the history of the Christian church, we find a movement called the Desert Mothers and Fathers. And these were early priests and writers and thinkers who retreated away from the world. They went out into the deserts of Egypt and they built these monasteries along the Nile. And there they lived out their lives thinking and writing and praying and trying to live as one with God, away from all of the sin of the world. And when people in the desert monasteries wrote out these lists that we have come to call the 7 deadly sins, those people called them the capital vices. It's not as catchy as 7 deadly sins, right? But it's important that we know what they meant when they talked about capital vices. I can kind of make the connection for how capital turned into deadly, right? Like, think capital punishment. I can kind of make the connection. But what's the difference between a sin and a vice? Well, a sin is a sin. It's a particular action. It's one thing you can choose to do. It is a harmful thing done that you can point to and say, when you hit me, it hurt. Or when you cheated people out of money, it was wrong. Or when you were just fine and apathetic about the suffering of those people, that was wrong. You fell short of who God created you to be. When we talk about sins, we're talking about individual actions people can do or combine together to make into bad systems. But a vice is different. A vice is a habit. A vice is a pattern. A vice is a way of living that over time opens the doors to new sins or new bad things. A vice is something that over time chips away at and erodes your moral character. So when we say that those desert writers wrote a list of 7 capital vices, they hadn't set out to name the 7 worst sins in the whole world. They were naming ways of living, habits of living that were destructive and self-destructive. That if you lived in these patterns over time, they would make you worse than you otherwise would have been. Maybe another way to say it is this: they weren't naming specific sins, they were naming sources of sins. A vice is something that chips away at you and makes you worse over time. When we talk about sin, we often find ourselves asking, what's really allowed? Am I allowed to do this? Is this technically a sin? Am I okay to do this? But with a vice, it's different. With a vice, we ask the question, if I choose to live in this way for a year, for 10 years, for my whole life, how will this way of living shape me? Who will I become if I live in this way? I think it's an important distinction because, like I said, often when we talk about sin, we're talking about this in 2 big ways. One is, what am I allowed to do? How far can I go? What is technically allowed and I'm still on the good side? And I think that way of thinking about sin often misses the point. And I think we don't have to look further than the Gospels and the stories of Jesus' ministry. Because Jesus doesn't seem to walk around to people and have a one strike and you're out policy. Right? Jesus doesn't really go to people and say, look, I love you, but if you ever do one of these 7 things once, you're out, you're done. The other way that we often have talked about sin in the church, it's kind of big, squishy idea, but maybe the best way to say it is, a lot of times when people talk about sin, what they're really talking about is controlling other people. What they're really talking about is changing someone's behavior or saying, you can do this and you can't do that. And these ways of talking about sin have pushed a lot of people away from the church. They have harmed a lot of people that have been called sinful, or the church has felt, for some reason, talking about a God of love in one breath and telling whole groups of people they're going to hell in the other. And the backlash from this and the bad ways the church has tackled sin has even pushed a lot of churches away from talking about sin at all. And as is often the case with these sorts of things, the people who are loudest about sin don't need to be the ones talking about it. They care more about volume than a witness to the gospel. So as we walk through this series over the next 7 weeks, I am not going to talk about sin in terms of do this, don't do that. And I'm not going to talk about sin in terms of controlling people or power over other people. The reason I think it's important that we study the vices, these capital vices, it's not so that we can be better at spotting what's wrong with other people, but it's so that we might know ourselves better. What are the things motivating me? What do I care about? What is driving my actions? How am I choosing to live out faith, and why? Maybe another way to say it is, there's ways to talk about sin that are more about personal freedom, freeing ourselves from bad and worse ways of living, freeing ourselves from these temptations to live in a way that over time will chip away at us. The first capital vice that we're talking about this week is a word called vainglory, which is a very, very medieval sounding word. Now, you might be thinking, okay, is that just a fancy word for pride? Because I'm pretty sure pride is on the list of the 7 deadly sins. It's a little complicated. The quick answer is this. Most of the writers who wrote a list of capital vices, and yes, there are more than one author and more than one list, they often list pride not as one of the vices, but as kind of this big umbrella category that no matter what sin you are engaging in, pride is always in the mix. So what they did is they pulled pride out of the list and said, this one's just in all of them, right? And that made room for another one on the 7, and that slot was filled with vainglory. Here's what I mean when I say that. If pride is the act of sitting back and saying, I'm great, I'm smart, no one's better than me, I think the world of myself, kind of like my friend Al Garrick, that's pride. Vainglory is similar but different. Vainglory is not thinking the world of yourself. Vainglory is doing everything you can so that other people think you're great. Vainglory is pouring yourself and your resources and your time into being liked by other people. That's why I started with my story about my friend Al, because Al never shut up about trying to tell you how great he thought he was. But the thing is, as much as he might have thought that about himself, he wanted me to think I was great. He wanted me to be impressed with the people that he had played with and the pianos that he's tuned and how smart of a guy he was. We all know that vainglory, this pursuit of other people's approval, man, that is everywhere today. And like I've already said, oftentimes what we do when we put ourselves out there to be admired and praised by other people, we're putting forward a version of ourselves that is not really who we are. We change with the crowd, we change with the season, we change with what's in the headlines. We will kind of do some sort of camouflage so that we can find that admiration and praise and being liked by other people. Earlier I read from the Gospel of Luke. And this is a perfect story to talk about vainglory. What we have is Jesus tells a story about 2 people who go up to the temple to pray. One is a Pharisee who would have been seen as a religious expert of the day, and one was a tax collector who was not very popular then and wouldn't be very popular now. And the Pharisee stands and he prays and he says, God, I'm really, really thankful to you that I am so much better than everybody else here. I'm really thankful that you didn't make me like all these other people, because I'm so good at this, right? It's not even that I'm good. I've got this whole faith thing figured out. I fast twice a week. I give money and 1/10 of everything I have. I am great at this. Now, some of y'all might be thinking, this doesn't sound like vainglory. This sounds like pride. It sounds like he thinks he's doing everything right, that he thinks he's great. But don't miss out on the detail. This guy's not praying alone in his own house. He's gone up to the temple to pray, meaning that he is there to be seen. Right? He would have been around other Pharisees who were always sort of in a competition of who is God's favorite. He would have been around other sinners like the tax collector. He may have started the prayer with God, but it's very clear he has a bigger audience in mind as he's praying this prayer. He wants the other Pharisees to see him as the best of them. He wants the people who are worse than them to know that they are worse than him. Look how good I am. Look how good I'm doing. Look how good I am at this. Y'all, this is ancient Instagram, right? Wow, I can't believe I'm this faithful and this cute at the same time. #blessed, right? But in contrast, the tax collector, he stands at a distance, right? He won't even come forward. He won't even raise his eyes to look towards heaven. Rather, he strikes his chest and he says, God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And it's that guy who Jesus says, this guy is justified. This guy is fulfilled. This guy does this the right way. Now, on one level, this is not groundbreaking, right? You don't need me to stand here and say, well, this was the good example and this was the bad example. We don't need a lot of explaining for that. But if we dig deeper into the next layer of this, this is not just a story of don't be like this guy, be like this guy. This is a story of how important it is to know yourself, to know who you are. The Pharisee is a picture of vainglory, of seeking praise and attention, not from God, but from the people who are watching him. Faith lived out well asks the question of us, how can I become what is good? How can I grow into who God has created me to be? But vainglory, on the other hand, asks, how can I become what people like? How can I become what people are wanting me to be? The tax collector here, not the most well-liked guy, simply prays to God, I'm a sinner, have mercy on me. The Pharisee knows how he's supposed to appear if he wants to keep his reputation and if he wants people to respect him and admire him. But the tax collector knows who he is, that he's a complicated person in a complicated world who's made mistakes but is still somehow able to access God. I would say to you, God would much rather you live a life where you know who you are and you know your problems and you know your mistakes and you know your sin, but at the same time, you know that you are still beloved by God. God would much rather you live that life than to live a life where you are always changing and adjusting and morphing into who you think you're supposed to be today. Because that's the thing about vainglory. On one level, it feels kind of harmless, right? Like I'm not out there doing bad stuff. I just want people to like me. You can even be vainglorious, what a word. You can even be vainglorious doing the right thing for the wrong reasons. Hey everybody, look at me. I'm out here volunteering and helping the needy and looking cute at the same time. #blessed. But remember, vices aren't the actions themselves, they are sources. They open the door to worse ways of living. So we can ask, what flows from vainglory? What does vainglory make possible and nurture and grow in our lives? I'm sure we could build out a list of lots of things, but I think the one that hits closest to home is this. Vainglory opens the door to deep isolation and profound loneliness. Which, if you've ever been there, you know that loneliness and isolation can open the door to lots of ways of living that will eat you alive. The irony of vainglory is that if you are always putting forward a version of yourself that is not really you, but it's a version of yourself you think people will like, then the people you're seeking the approval from will never know the real you. They'll know the fake you that you have intricately designed and put the right filter over and posted at just the right time. They'll know that fake you, but they won't really know you. if you give in to this temptation to always be the person who is going to get the most likes or the most admiration or be praised, if you live that life of always adjusting to the likes of other people or the impossible standards of social media, if you live a life where you do not know yourself, you will spend your life showing up not as you are, but as who you wish you were. And y'all, God does not desire that life for any of you. The truth is, human relationships with God, they thrive and they flourish in truthfulness and sincerity. The relationships that will make your life good, that will fill your life with meaning, they flourish and grow when you show up as yourself and you know that you are known and loved for who you are, that you don't have to put forward a version of yourself that you think someone's going to like more than who you really are. And if you're willing to set aside that drive and that temptation to always be the person who's going to be liked and praised, if you can set that aside, you will gain something that will change your life. A chance to be truly known and truly loved for who you are. I would say that is probably my deepest desire for us as Parkway and us as the Church of Jesus Christ. That we will choose and strive to be a community that doesn't adjust how we talk or appear to match headlines or the season that we're in, but that we will be a community that shifts away from judging ourselves by how many people are in seats on a Sunday morning, or how much money we have in the bank, or how much did we grow, or are we attracting the right people? No, I don't want to be that church. I want us to be a church and a community where all sorts of different people can show up in this place and be truly known as who they are and loved for who they are. That's the kind of community and relationships that God desires for us. And if that's true, the question for us is, how do we resist the temptation? How do we resist vainglory or the desire to simply be a fake version of ourselves that only wants to be liked? The good news is, I have some very specific, very concrete actions you can do this week. Isn't it great when you get really clear instructions from the sermon, right? You don't just nod your head and go on. The first is this. If you want to leave vainglory behind, be a celebrator of people. Sometimes we can come to see people as simply we are in competition with, right? I'm going to be better than you. I'm going to win the award. I'm going to be the best at this. And if we're being honest, we have all had that moment where we have hated someone else's success, right? We've all put on that face and like, I'm so happy for you. That should be me that got the promotion. That should be me who got the award, and looking cute at the same time. #blessed. One of the ways you can cut vainglory off as a source of a worse way of living is to celebrate someone to their face. Celebrate what is good about them. Look at their success, good qualities, what they bring to your life, and tell that to them. Celebrate someone else's success, because then at that point, all roads don't have to run back to your own success or your own image or your own reputation. If you want to avoid vainglory, be a celebrator of people and the good things they do and the successes in their life. You can do that in about 30 seconds. If you do that once a day, every day for the next week, you'll be doing the opposite of a vice. Remember, vices chip away, but this is what's the opposite of a vice? A virtue. Right? A virtue is a source of a better way of living. And if every day you set out to celebrate someone, and don't just celebrate your spouse, they know that you love them, right? Celebrate somebody at work. Celebrate your kids. Celebrate a neighbor. If you're really brave, celebrate someone who annoys you, right? Celebrate someone you're in competition with, or you feel that you are. If you do that, you will be opening the door to a better source of life and living. If you're not quite ready to celebrate someone, you'll get there. I'll have another option for you. Sometimes when we do good and nobody sees it, it feels like it's worse than if someone would have seen it, right? Like, why am I putting in the effort to do all this if nobody's seeing it? But here's the thing. The idea that something's worse if nobody sees it is a lie, right? That's the clearest I can put it. It is a lie. Because like I've already said, you can do the right thing for the wrong reason. But this is a series not about do this, don't do that. It's about knowing ourselves. Why do I want this to be seen? What am I looking for in this? So if you're not ready to celebrate somebody, one, work on it. But two, the other thing you can do is this. Do some good for someone this week. It's okay if they know that you did it, right? We don't have to operate in the shadows. Do good for somebody, but then do not tell anybody that you did it. Do the good and move on. And know that that good is not worse because it hasn't been celebrated. The thing with vainglory and all the other vices we're going to walk through in the next couple of weeks, the reason that they are still around in this list of 7 deadly sins or capital vices still matches the things we struggle with, part of the reason they endure is that all of these things tempt us with the lie that they can satisfy our deepest human desires, right? Vainglory says, if you just be who everybody wants you to be, you will be known and you will be celebrated, you will be accepted, and you will be loved. But the reason it is a lie is that it opens a way of living where the people you want to like you will never really know who you are. Each of these vices promises to satisfy one of the deepest human desires that we all have, but it can never deliver what it promises. And my hope and my prayer is that we can leave this place today knowing that we all are tempted to be vainglorious people. But it's because we want to be liked. It's because we want people to know us for who we are. And it's because we want to be loved. My hope is that in the ways we can cut off this source of vice, of vainglory, that we can be a church that celebrates people. We can be a church where people can feel safe enough to be known for who they really are. And they can be loved and celebrated for who they are. And I think if that's who we can be, loving and serving others and each other selflessly, we can, through the grace and love of God, we ourselves can become a source for a better way of living that really does satisfy that deep human desire to know and to be known, to love and to be loved. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, alleluia and amen.